It was a quiet morning in a small town where a soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying the sound of church bells in the distance. The people of the town had gathered in the old cemetery to say their final goodbye to a man they all respected, Samuel "Sam" Miller, a 92-year-old World War II veteran. The grass was still wet with dew, and the air held a certain sadness mixed with pride. Sam had lived a long, honest life, one filled with service, discipline, and love for his country. He was the kind of man who always stood straight when the national anthem played, even when age had bent his back. His daughter, Linda Miller, stood beside the casket with tears in her eyes. She held a folded flag close to her heart, the same flag that had once been on her father's porch for decades. That flag meant everything to her because it represented her father's sacrifice and honor. It was supposed to be formally presented to her during the funeral service by the military honor guard, a final tribute to a soldier who had given his best years for his country. Family and friends surrounded her, dressed in black, their faces filled with respect and sorrow. A group of local veterans stood quietly in uniform, their hats pressed to their chests. The bugler stood ready to play taps, the last farewell that always touched hearts. Everything seemed perfect for the moment Sam deserved. Solemn, proud, and peaceful. But then something unexpected happened as the ceremony began. One of the funeral officials walked up to Linda with an uncomfortable expression. He whispered something that made her eyebrows raise. The man cleared his throat and spoke softly but loud enough for a few nearby to hear. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry, but we have a small issue with the flag presentation. According to our record, we cannot officially present the ceremonial flag at this time." For a moment, Linda couldn't understand. "What do you mean?" she asked, holding the folded flag tighter. The official explained that there was a missing document, something about a service confirmation that hadn't been found in the records. Without that paper, the rule said they couldn't officially hand over the flag in honor of her father's service. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and confusion spread among the crowd. Some whispered in disbelief. Others shook their heads, feeling that something was not right. How could anyone question the service of a man like Sam Miller, who had served in the army for years and carried scars both seen and unseen from the war? The honor guard members, looking uncomfortable, hesitated and finally stepped back, uncertain of what to do. The flag that had been meant for the presentation was carefully taken away by the official, as if it was just another piece of cloth. The sound of the wind filled the space where the bugler was supposed to play. The ceremony suddenly felt empty, incomplete. Linda looked down, trying not to cry, but her heart broke seeing her father's final farewell being handled like this. The people around her could feel her pain, but no one knew how to fix it. Among the crowd, standing quietly near a tree, was a man in a dark coat. He had attended the funeral alone, his hands behind his back, his posture straight and firm. His face was calm, but his eyes were focused on everything happening in front of him. His name was Sergeant James Cole, a tomb guard from Arlington National Cemetery, one of the soldiers chosen to stand watch over the tomb of the unknown soldier. He wasn't there as part of duty that day. He was there because Sam Miller had once trained his uncle in the service, and he had come to pay his respects. As he watched the confusion and disappointment unfold, something stirred in him. He had spent years guarding the tomb where silence speaks louder than words, where respect is more than just ceremony. It is sacred. Seeing a veteran's honor being taken away over a piece of missing paper felt deeply wrong to him. He stood still for a moment, then began walking toward the front. His steps were firm but quiet. The people turned to see him approach, and even the officials paused. There was something about his presence, not prideful, not angry, just calm and full of purpose. When he reached Linda, he bowed his head slightly and spoke softly. "Ma'am, my name is Sergeant James Cole. I serve as a tomb guard at Arlington. I'd like to help if you'll allow me." Linda looked at him with surprise and a small flicker of hope. "They said the paperwork was missing. They said my father doesn't qualify for the flag," she said, her voice trembling. Sergeant Cole nodded slowly, his eyes gentle but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "no paperwork can ever erase a man's service. Your father earned that flag long ago. The record might be missing, but his honor isn't." The crowd fell silent again, listening. The official tried to step in, explaining that there were rules, but Cole turned to him politely. "Sir," he said, "I understand your position, but I also understand what this means. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't wait for permission. He reached into the small black case he carried, something he always kept with him when attending any veteran's ceremony. Inside was a neatly folded flag. He had kept it for emergencies, a spare that had once been part of a ceremonial set used at Arlington. It was the same size, the same symbol, carrying the same meaning. The official hesitated but did not stop him. The crowd stood completely still, their eyes following every motion. Sergeant Cole stepped to the casket, opened the flag with care, and began folding it again, slowly, precisely, the way only those trained in the art could do. Each fold was made with purpose, his gloved hands moving with silent respect. When he finished, he turned toward Linda, knelt on one knee, and presented it to her with steady hands. His voice was soft but strong when he spoke the traditional words. On behalf of a grateful nation, please accept this flag for your father's service and sacrifice. For a moment, no one breathed. Linda's tears fell freely as she accepted the flag, holding it close to her heart once again. The crowd's eyes filled with emotion. Even the funeral officials lowered their heads, realizing the depth of what had just happened. Sergeant Cole then stood, gave a respectful salute to the casket, and stepped back without another word. The bugler, moved by the moment, lifted his trumpet and played taps. The sound drifted through the cemetery, soft and slow, wrapping around every person present like a warm farewell. In that quiet place, beneath the waving trees and morning sky, the meaning of respect was restored. No rule, no mistake, no missing record could ever take away what Sam Miller had given. And as Linda stood holding the flag, she knew her father's honor had been defended, not by command but by conscience. That day, everyone who witnessed it understood one truth. Sometimes heroes appear not in war, but in moments of silence when the right heart chooses to stand for what's right. After the funeral ended, people stood quietly around the grave, still feeling the power of what had just happened. The sound of taps still echoed softly in their hearts. Many of them had tears in their eyes, not only because they said goodbye to Samuel Miller, but because of the act of courage they had just witnessed. No one expected a stranger, a tomb guard from Arlington, to step forward and bring back the honor that had been lost. It was something people would talk about for a long time. Linda stood still for a while, holding the flag close to her chest. She wanted to thank Sergeant Cole, but when she turned to look for him, he had quietly stepped aside, blending into the crowd. He was speaking with a few other veterans, his voice calm, his expression thoughtful. She could see that he was not looking for attention or thanks. He had simply done what felt right in his heart. A few minutes later, Linda walked toward him. Her steps were slow, but her eyes were filled with gratitude. "Sergeant," she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't even know my father, but you did something no one else had the courage to do." Cole smiled gently and shook his head. "Ma'am, you don't owe me anything," he said. "Your father earned that flag the moment he put on the uniform. I just made sure he got what he deserved." Linda's eyes filled again, and she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "My father would have been proud to see someone like you there," she whispered. Cole simply gave a small nod and looked toward the casket one last time. Then, after giving a final salute, he walked away quietly. He didn't wait for anyone to stop him or take pictures. He just walked down the narrow path of the cemetery until he disappeared around the corner of the old oak tree. The people who remained there felt something unusual, a mix of peace, sadness, and inspiration. The local reporter who had been covering the funeral watched everything carefully. His name was Mark Davis, and he had written many stories about veterans before, but he knew this one was different. There was something powerful about how one act of respect could change everything. He made a note in his small notebook: the tomb guard who stood for honor. Later that evening, Linda returned home with the flag resting on her lap. She placed it gently on her dining table and sat in silence for a long time. Her home was filled with her father's photos, pictures of him in uniform, smiling beside his fellow soldiers, and later, standing proudly on his porch with that same flag flying behind him. She felt a strange comfort now, as if a part of her father's spirit was still with her. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, Sergeant Cole returned to his post at Arlington National Cemetery. It was late in the evening, and the sun was setting behind the rows of white headstones. He stood in silence before the tomb of the unknown soldier, his hand resting on his heart. He wasn't thinking about what people might say, or whether anyone would hear about what he had done. He only thought about the meaning of his duty, to never let any soldier's honor be forgotten. The next morning, Mark Davis published his article in the local newspaper. The story spread faster than anyone expected. The headline read, "They took the old vet's flag away, but then the tomb guard stepped in." The story described everything that had happened, from the moment the flag was taken away to the moment Sergeant Cole presented it back to Linda. It wasn't written with anger or blame. It was written with admiration and respect. People who read it felt something stir inside them. The article quickly spread across social media, shared by veterans, military families, and ordinary citizens who believed in honor and gratitude. Within a few days, messages began arriving at Linda's home from people all across the country. Some wrote letters, others sent flowers, and many shared their own stories about moments when their loved one's service had been forgotten or disrespected. They all said the same thing, that Sergeant Cole had reminded them what true respect meant. One afternoon, Linda received a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The official on the other end of the line sounded formal but sincere. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "we have reviewed your father's record. It appears there was a clerical mistake in our system. Your father's service was verified, and he was absolutely eligible for the ceremonial flag. We deeply apologize for the misunderstanding." Linda listened quietly, her heart both relieved and heavy. "Thank you," she said simply, "but I already have the flag now, and I have something even more valuable. I have proof that there are still people who understand what respect means." The official paused for a moment before saying softly, "Ma'am, the entire department read the story. Sergeant Cole reminded us too." That evening, Linda sat on her porch with the flag carefully folded in her lap. She looked up at the sky as the sun began to set, painting everything in soft orange light. Her heart felt calm. She thought about how life often brings unexpected heroes, not always in battles or big moments, but in quiet acts of courage that no one asks for. At the same time, in Arlington, Sergeant Cole's commanding officer called him into the office. "Cole," the officer said, "that story about you has been everywhere." The department called. "You could be up for a commendation." Cole shook his head with a small smile. "Sir, I don't need a medal for doing what's right." The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's exactly what makes you a good soldier." In the days that followed, the story continued to grow. Television channels picked it up and people began calling Cole the guard who defended honor. But Cole stayed the same, humble, quiet, and respectful. He didn't talk much about that day, even when others tried to interview him. Whenever someone asked why he did it, his answer was always the same: because no veteran should ever leave this world without the respect they earned. Back in the small town, the cemetery became a place people visited not only to remember Samuel Miller, but to remember the story of what happened that day. The local veterans put up a small plaque near the entrance. It read, "In honor of all who served, and in memory of those who stood for what was right when silence was easier." Every time Linda visited, she placed a single white flower beneath the plaque and whispered a quiet prayer for both her father and the man who stood up for him. That one act of kindness had touched hearts far beyond that little town. It showed people that even in a world full of rules and mistakes, there are still those who carry respect like a shield, ready to protect the dignity of others, even when no one asks them to. And though Sergeant Cole never sought recognition, his name became known in military circles as a symbol of quiet bravery, the kind that doesn't need applause, only understanding. Weeks passed after the funeral, but the memory of that day stayed fresh in everyone's heart. The story of the tomb guard who stepped in had spread far beyond the little town. People who never knew Samuel Miller began to speak his name with respect. And more than that, they spoke of the soldier who had stood up quietly for what was right, Sergeant James Cole. For Linda, life slowly began to settle again, but something in her had changed. Every morning she would sit by the window where sunlight fell softly on her father's framed photo. Right beside it sat the folded flag, perfectly preserved inside a glass case. On a small plaque below it, she had engraved the words, "Respect is never optional." Those were the last words she remembered hearing from Sergeant Cole before he walked away that day. Sometimes, visitors would come, old friends, neighbors, And even people she had never met before. They would stop to see the flag and listen to the story. Linda would tell them everything exactly as it happened, from the confusion at the funeral to the moment when that quiet soldier knelt before her. And every time she spoke, she felt a sense of warmth, as if her father was still close by, smiling from above. One afternoon, Linda received a letter with a simple return address, Arlington National Cemetery. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from Sergeant Cole. It read, "Mrs. Miller, I hope you and your family are doing well. I wanted to thank you for allowing me to be part of your father's farewell. That day reminded me why I chose to serve, not for medals or ranks, but to protect the meaning of honor. Your father served his country with courage, and I was proud to stand for him, even if just for a moment. With respect, Sergeant James Cole." Tears filled Linda's eyes as she read the note. It was simple but full of heart. She placed it carefully in the same frame beside the flag, knowing that one day, people would see it and remember the story not as a headline, but as a lesson in kindness and courage. Meanwhile, at Arlington, things were changing for Sergeant Cole, too. His quiet act of respect had reached many in the military community. Letters and messages poured in, not just from officers, but from ordinary citizens, veterans' families, and even school children who had heard the story in class. Some drew pictures of flags. Others wrote small notes saying, "Thank you for standing up for the old soldier." Cole appreciated the messages, but he never saw himself as a hero. When asked about it by his fellow guards, he simply said, "I did what any soldier should do." To him, that day wasn't about breaking a rule. It was about protecting what mattered most. One day, during a ceremony at Arlington, his commanding officer called him aside. "Cole," he said with a proud smile, "there's someone here to see you." Cole turned to see Linda standing there, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. She had come all the way to thank him properly. The sight of her surprised him, but he smiled warmly and saluted her. "Ma'am, you didn't need to come all this way," he said kindly. "I did," Linda replied, "because you didn't just give me a flag, you gave me peace. My father always said respect isn't shown by words but by actions. You prove that." Cole looked at her for a moment, his expression calm but touched. "Your father must have been a great man," he said. "He was," Linda answered softly. "And so are you." She placed the flowers at the base of the tomb of the unknown soldier where Cole stood guard each day. Then she stepped back, standing silently as the wind rustled through the trees. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence itself carried meaning, the kind that doesn't need words. After she left, Cole resumed his post. He stood tall, motionless, guarding the tomb as he always did. But that day felt different. He knew that even the smallest act of respect could touch lives in ways that went far beyond what he could see. Months later, on Veterans Day, the story was told again, this time at a national ceremony. The announcer spoke of a soldier who reminded us all that duty is not only about following orders, but about following the heart. Cole was invited to attend, but he stood quietly in the back, away from the cameras. When people applauded, he lowered his head humbly. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because it was the right thing. Back in her town, Linda organized a small event in honor of her father and all local veterans. She displayed the flag, the letter from Cole, and a few of her father's old photos. Children came to listen as she told the story again, in simple words that everyone could understand. She ended every retelling with the same message. It doesn't take power to show respect. It just takes heart. The story began to inspire others. A few years later, the town built a small memorial garden dedicated to veterans. At the center stood a statue, not of a soldier in battle, but of one kneeling, holding a folded flag. On the base of the statue, the same words were carved. Respect is never optional. Every year, on the anniversary of her father's passing, Linda would visit that garden. She would bring a small flag and place it by the statue. Sometimes she came alone. Sometimes people joined her. No matter what, she always felt peace knowing that her father's story, and the act of one kind soldier, would never be forgotten. As for Sergeant Cole, he continued his service quietly, year after year. When asked in an interview once what that moment meant to him, he simply said, "That flag was more than a symbol. It was a promise. A promise that we will never forget those who gave their lives, and we will never let anyone take away their honor. The interviewer asked him if he would do the same again if faced with a similar situation. Cole smiled and answered softly, "Every single time." And so, the story of that day, when a flag was taken away and then returned with dignity, became more than just a memory. It became a reminder that in every generation, there are people who stand quietly for what's right, even when no one is watching. Years later, long after both Linda and Sergeant Cole had grown old, the story was still told in classrooms, at military gatherings, and on Memorial Day ceremonies. It reminded everyone that true honor lives not in words or papers but in actions and hearts.